Hello and welcome back to the Paradigm Podcast. Today we're talking with Keith Debono, resident Australian, podcast extraordinaire, man who wears too many hats, and all-around great dude. So we're just going to jump right into it.
Thanks so much, guys, for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited to be here. What do you guys want to know?
Mr. Debono, you're from Australia, right?
Yes, that is correct.
What part of Australia did you grow up in?
I grew up about 45 minutes outside of Sydney. So, Opera House, Harbour Bridge, kangaroos, all that stuff.
I have a very important question. Have you ever been to Bondi Beach?
Yes, I have spent a lot of time at Bondi Beach until it got a little bit too crowded with tourists, and then we found other beaches.
I have a more important question. What's Bondi Beach?
It's just one of the more popular, well-known Australian beaches in Sydney. It's pretty great.
There's a whole show called Bondi Rescue.
There's also Bondi Vet, which I think is the more superior show
Bondi
because the vet Chris guy,
Does he just go around saving kangaroos?
No, he saves actual people's pets and stuff.
Oh,
Way
if they
more
bring their
important.
dogs
So
to the
irrelevant.
beach?
Yeah, he's just a vet.
Okay.
People like to take
He's just
him
a
to the
regular
vet.
vet, guys.
Just a
Don't worry
regular
about
vet.
it. So you grew up in just outside of Sydney. What was childhood like in Australia?
So my family's Mediterranean from Malta. So my Australian childhood was not like what you might have seen on TV or whatever. So unfortunately, we didn't ride in the patches of kangaroos to get to school, or we did eat Vegemite on toast for breakfast a whole bunch.
Did you
So I
have
guess
the
kind of.
bleached blonde hair with the shark tooth shell necklace?
No. I did eventually bleach my hair blonde, but that was much later in life during high school. Yeah, no, it was typical childhood. I was born and raised Catholic, and was like an altar boy and all that kind of stuff, and sort of balanced that with school and friends and the regular stuff. I was just a person who lived.
So Australia and Utah are very different places.
Yeah, they are.
And when I think of, if I lived in Australia and I was like, I'm going to move to the United States, I wouldn't think Utah. Why was Utah appealing to you? Why did you choose Utah?
I think the biggest reason is because, I don't know if you know this, but Utah and Australia are very different places.
They are, yes.
Really?
That's exactly what you just asked
No
me.
way.
No, I just kind of you get sort of into your ruts and stuff, and you get in the same place and going to college and studying accounting, and realize that I was just kind of over it. And I had a friend who was from Logan, Utah. She would talk to me about the mountains and the snow and what her school was like and all the rest of it. And I was just like, that sounds nothing like where I live. So I'm going to go there. And I did. And, with a few sort of weird coincidences, I ended up living in a dorm room 2 doors down from the woman who's now my wife and the mother of my 2 beautiful daughters. And sort of all snowballed from one student exchange trip.
Wow.
So where were you going to school at the time to study accounting, and why did you think that accounting was the path for you?
I really didn't. So in Mediterranean families, especially in mine, the dad's word is kind of law. And so for him, it was always that I was going to go to law or accounting. He didn't, graduate high school, and neither did my mom. And so they were like, oh yeah, you're smart. You're going to go to college. And if you go to college, the thing that you're supposed to do is go do law, right? And so I did a bachelor in accounting with majoring in accounting and minoring in financial and commercial law. So doing exactly what they wanted me to do. And I was working for an accounting firm, and I realized that I hated it a whole bunch. It was genuinely horrible. I refused to quit my job working at a cinema just because I knew that accounting was always going to suck. And so, yeah, I when I got to Utah State, I kind of had my eyes open and realized, hey, the thing I actually love doing, at the time I was tutoring university law students. And so that was sort of what I was looking forward to, was going to tutoring. And that kind of led me to think, hey, maybe teaching is actually the way to go. And then my wife was like, you're miserable all the time. Just go do teaching. And I did. And that's where I ended up. So I ended up with a master's in education, and I've been teaching for about 7 years now, and came to Paradigm. This is my 3rd year. I showed up at the doorstep of Paradigm a week after my interview, which was at 2 a.m. in Australia over Skype. And I got here the day before school started, heavily jet lagged, ready to teach Les Mis, which I had read on the plane on the way here.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it was an experience, but I haven't looked back. It's been amazing.
So I was a little bit confused on that timeline. So you're going to school in Australia. You do an exchange trip here to Utah to check it out. And then where along the lines does marriage and then actually moving here?
Yeah, so I I did an exchange trip to Utah. Then my wife, who was at the time my girlfriend, did an exchange back to Australia for 6 months. We got engaged there. And then I did another year for my master's up at Utah State in education. And we got married during that time. Moved to Australia, spent about 5 years there, and then came back in 2018.
So you were teaching in Australia. How does teaching in Australia compare and contrast to teaching here in Utah?
Well, I was teaching in like kind of niche schools. So in Australia, we have Islamic private schools. There's a fair few of them. We have a pretty big Islamic population over there of immigrants and stuff. And so I had been working in these 2 Islamic private schools, which were very, very heavily regimented. There was not a lot of freedom of what I could teach. And so how I taught became kind of the way that I rebelled, I guess. And then I get to Paradigm, and it turns out how I was teaching was basically what Paradigm wanted, with a few tweaks I had to make because things were a bit weird and a bit different here. And I distinctly remember, asking for lesson plans and being told, just here's the book. You can teach the book. And that was very different from the lesson plans in Australia where, down to the minute was planned for me. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I would get in trouble at schools in Australia for changing an assignment into a lesson or a personal interview because that wasn't what they wanted, even though it would, give better results half the time. So
that is
very
ridiculous.
different, very different to Paradigm.
You got on your plane, you moved to Utah, and then you started teaching the next day. I remember I was in that class, and I was like, he's cool, and he's Australian. It's going to be a different experience, and I'm sure it was 100% a different experience for you.
I think it was different for you, too, if I remember correctly.
But, once we actually got into, the flow of how, our school works, what is something that, stood out to you, or is it, a book that you just, gravitated towards?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Paradigm has these national books, right? So Les Mis is part of our culture. Everybody reads it. But there are these books. So you've got TJ Ed, which is Thomas Jefferson Education. That's part of the culture of Paradigm. But for me, the book was Anatomy of Peace by the Arbiter Institute. And it's basically just a way, it's kind of like a self-help book disguised by a really thin plot. That it's its whole purpose is helping people understand how to deal with conflict and how to interact with people and how to overcome the barriers and the labels that we give each other, that kind of stuff. So that book, I can honestly say, literally changed my life. That's one of those things everyone 100%. Says, oh, you're exaggerating, blah, blah, it's so cliche. No, legitimately, it changed the way that I look at people, the way I speak to people, the way I interact with family, friends, students, with my peers. It changed a whole bunch about who I am. And I think that for the better, for the most part.
So I know that your new project has a lot to do with the Anatomy of Peace. Can you tell us about that? What's your new project called that you're working on?
Yeah, so it's the Camp Moriah Movement, and Paradigm scholars will be familiar with Camp Moriah as the place in the aforementioned thinly veiled plot where people learn how to talk to each other.
Yeah, it's basically it's like doctors feel send them to the ranch, but peace and love, they send all these these troubled teenagers, and they're going to work with Camp Moriah.
So are you setting up a literal camp in the middle of the desert to send troubled youth to?
I am not going to set up a literal camp in the desert. I'm actually a lot more focused on the workshop environment that you see in the book, right? So you have Ali and Yusuf, and they're talking to all the parents of the kids who got sent off to camp, right? And that's where the real focus of the book is. It's not really on the camp itself, but rather on this piece that's a bit unexpected where the parents of these children workshop how to overcome conflict. And basically how the Camp Moriah movement applies, okay, is that in society, we have a tendency to label literally everything, right? It's sort of what we do to make sense of the world around us. But labels, by definition, are very categorizing, right? They sort of put everything in a category, and that separates one label from the other. We do it at Paradigm. We have mentors and scholars. We have administration, office staff. Everybody has it. It's all over the place. But sometimes what can happen is that we can rely too heavily on the label and forget about the underlying real categorization of person, human. You know what I mean? And so we tend to look at them as the label or as an object, as the Anatomy of Peace would say. And when you can do that, when you can look at somebody as an object, you don't have to be nice to them because they are inferior to you by definition. You know, you're not necessarily concerned with the feelings of a chair, right? But the point is that we have a tendency to treat people like objects because the labels facilitate that, right? We can distance them from human beings because that's just my teacher. And, you know, you see this all the time because you go to a shopping center and you see a teacher there and you're like, Mr. So-and-so, what are you doing here? And your teacher says, buying groceries? I actually remember I ran into Dallin.
I ran into you
at Harmon's, yeah.
You don't just plug yourself in at night?
It was a completely separate Harmon's.
Yeah, it was
very
like in
far
West
away.
Valley. I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, this is my Harmon's. Like, this is my Harmon's.
He got very territorial. There was a shooting.
You were buying donuts.
I was buying donuts, and I
Yes.
also bought kombucha.
Yes. And like, you know, it's kind of a weird thing to see your teacher, your mentor outside of the school because they're not a person to you. They're an object. And at Paradigm, we really, really pride ourselves on adding value to our scholars, right? We want them to know that we love them, that we care about them, that we think that they are important, we want to listen to them. And all that value going into someone kind of can have two effects, right? The ideal effect is that it increases their self-worth, and they take that self-worth and they do a value add to the next person they speak to. And that's awesome.
The opposite effect is that they become a giant egotistical maniac who interrupts everyone with bad jokes.
Oh, good job. You do have a tendency to become entitled. When you get value given to you, it can lead to an entitlement complex. And it's a natural thing. Human beings in general, we look for worth, right? We want to be valued. And so part of the Camp Moriah movement is just to raise awareness to the fact that everyone that we interact with on any given day, for any given length of time, is a human being who is living a life that is at least as complicated as we are. And that's really what it is. It's just getting out there and not just spreading awareness, but living that truth. You know, so accepting that I am not any better or any worse than anybody else that I come across. And so that means that I should treat them with the dignity and respect that I would want to be treated.
So my question is, so yeah, it's a really cool idea. You know, everybody has worth, and I need to start seeing people as people and, you know, recognizing my own flaws and my pride and my entitlement. But how is this going to be like a movement?
Right. So the movement part of this, I think, is actually just creating that culture in Paradigm, right? And not just in Paradigm. Paradigm's like the beginning. It's where we have influence right now, and it's where you have influence, where I have influence. Hopefully this podcast is going to be a great way to reach some people, but every change has to start somewhere, you know? And we're in a society right now where people really undervalue the opinions and even the actions of teenagers. And that's to their detriment. Because in my life, I have learned a ton from every student I've interacted with. And that's one of the greatest joys of being an educator, is that I get to learn over and over and over again, not just what it's like to be human, but what it's like to experience anxiety and fear and stress and love and joy and passion. By the time you get to be an adult, right, you've experienced a lot of really amazing things, which is awesome. But you have fewer of the best thing in your future, right? When you're a young person, every time you experience the greatest thing ever, it just keeps getting greater and greater, right? Your first love is an incredible, amazing experience. And then your second love is a new and incredible, amazing experience. And it doesn't diminish you or love or anything just because you're young. In fact, because you've never experienced something so intense, it is far more intense than a new love for an adult who may have experienced many in their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I'm totally off track, but the movement comes from taking these experiences, creating this culture of people who care about each other, who treat each other and see each other as people. And it starts from young people, because one of the things 9 Peace teaches us is that the only way to create a change in somebody else is to show and be that change yourself, right? So the more often you treat your teacher or your mentor like a person, the more often that they'll do the same to you, because what's the alternative? You treat them nicely and they treat you like a chair.
And through that, like, your perspective and the way you view them will literally change. We'd like to believe that we can do something and not feel anything, but like, if you're going to be kind to someone and choose to understand them, you're going to learn to love them. That's what I think is super cool.
Right. And I mean, that's my favorite thing about the anatomy of peace, right? The anatomy of peace presumes that the natural instinct of man is to love. It is to be positive and to respect. And that's so great. It talks about when you get into conflict, the primary reason is because you've committed an act of self-betrayal. You've betrayed your natural instinct to love, to share, to honor the person in front of you. And you have, I think the story is of Yusuf when he's a young kid. You guys remember the story?
Yes.
No, I've never read the anatomy of peace. I know. That's why I want to be asking the questions. I got like questions. I'm like, what's going on here?
Okay, so one of the main instructors, Yusuf, right? He is in his home country, and he is on the streets, living on the streets, and there's a blind man who is, I can't remember if he's Jewish or Palestinian, but he's of the opposite of those two to Yusuf.
Is it his name Malachi?
Malachi, yes.
Yes.
So Malachi dropped his jar of coins, right?
He's a blind old man.
Yes. And Yusuf betrays himself and ignores Malachi because of their difference in social and religious status, and instantly feels horrible about it and begins to actually belittle Malachi and blame Malachi. And he realizes later on in life that the reason this happened is not because Malachi is worse than him. It's because he betrayed his instinct to help, right? And so that, as a foundation for a movement, to me, I mean, there is no better. If the foundation for your movement is that love and respect is the natural response to the things that happen around you, you will inherently do more good in this world than you will take away.
So with movements, it's all about an actionable thing, right? So you have this really impressive backbone and moral foundation to base action off of. With your movement, what are you encouraging people to do, and what are you doing to make a positive change in the world?
So firstly, I want to say it's our movement, right? We're all people. This is our movement. And it's, sure, we're starting at a paradigm, but I really hope that it goes beyond that, and it starts to spread, because I think it make a really positive change. But to your point, what are the actions? The hardest thing to do when you have a relationship in which you've seen somebody as an object, right? As an obstacle to overcome, or as a thing you have to fix, right? Is to switch your mindset over to seeing them as a person. It's so difficult to do. And it's a very internal action, right? We don't see that action physically. There's not a switch that you flick next to your ear that turns your vision to seeing people as people.
Oh, what are you talking about?
Right?
It's right here.
You
Found it.
don't have that?
Debono, what's wrong with your switch?
So it's not a physical action that you can see, but it is a profound action that has a really amazing effect. And so the first step, I believe, is to find someone who you have treated like an object and just have a conversation with that person. Nothing to do with your previous experience. Literally something as simple as, what did you do this weekend? Or how are you feeling today? And genuinely caring about what their response is, because you care about that human. That is the first step in the Camp Moriah movement.
We've talked about this before, just you and I, but I feel like that has so much room to make people like your little project. Like, I'm such a good person because I can be nice to someone today, or I can make their day better. Like, how do I go about, seeing people as people and following the Camp Moriah movement without turning people into my personal little projects?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing is awareness, right? If you are turning someone into your project, right? You could have a project where you renovate your house. You could have a project where you are trying to fix up a motorbike, right? Projects are done on objects by people, right? So if you're working on a project of yourself, that's one thing, like the Paradigm Project. But if you're working on somebody else as your project, you're already seeing them as an object, right? So this movement, this idea, whatever you want to call it, it can't originate from me. That's why I say it's not my movement. It can't originate from anywhere except for in the heart of the individual who's doing it. You have to really mean it. You have to really want to see people as people. And you have to understand that you may not get any benefit at all from seeing a particular person as a person. They may never come round and treat you like a person. But what you're doing is you're honoring the nobility of that person, but you're also honoring your own nobility. You're honoring the fact that you are a person. And that's enough.
So recently I was listening to a guy talking about computer processors, and he was talking about the processing power. There's this philosophy that it says that we're all in like a computer simulation, like the Matrix, and that everyone else is simulated except for you. And he was talking about how much processing power it would take to simulate consciousness and to like fully understand it, and the ridiculous amount that it would take. And it got me thinking about how like I feel like it'd be my belief that one of the reasons we tend to view people as objects is because it is so much work to constantly try and be looking at it through other people's eyes. It makes my head spin.
Absolutely.
And I might just be a bad person,
No.
but
No, you're just a person. This is totally true, right? My first experience. Have you guys heard the word sonder before?
no.
Okay. It's a made-up word.
Well, that's why I haven't heard it, Mr.
Right.
Debono.
I didn't make it up.
I
It's
just
been
made it up now.
before. But it's a
gotcha,
made-up word
gotcha.
that basically means that every person that you interact with is experiencing a life that is at least as complicated as your own, right? And this is where, I remember I was backpacking in Europe after my exchange, right? And I was over in London, and I was sitting in this restaurant, and it's like a Japanese restaurant. In London. And this
And
this
it was an
waitress,
Australian man in a Japanese one.
Yeah, an Australian man in a Japanese restaurant in London.
An Australian man walks into a Japanese restaurant
In
in London.
You're like, this is a racist joke.
Yeah, it's a revolutionary,
I can feel
life-changing experience. But no, my waitress was kind of a jerk. I don't know how else to explain it. She was like really mean. She was, dismissive, barely spoke to me, threw my food on the table. I thought I like offended her in some way. And as I'm sitting there, she had a phone call that she took right next to my table, because why not? She's having a day. And in that conversation that I couldn't help but overhear, she's talking about how she's getting evicted and how she has to go deal with her mom and all this other random stuff that I have no idea about. And I sat there and I was like, holy crap, like, she's alive. She's like, that sounds stupid to like be like, oh my gosh, this waitress is alive. But really, she's experiencing a really complicated, difficult time. And I'm judging her for being a little bit short with me. And it was just a really huge eye-opener to me that, yeah, every single person.
Definitely. I've had moments where I'll be at work and, it's like, it's cold out, or the line is moving really slowly or something, or customers are just being annoying. And then something will like happen in my brain. And then I'll look at the person I'm serving and I'm like, I wonder, this sounds really bad, but it's like, I wonder when they're gonna die, like or how long are they gonna like be alive for? Did this couple that just come through, is this their first date, or are they friends, or are they siblings, or are they gonna break up, or like all these things? Like it's weird to like, because it's so easy, because they are making my life harder by making me do my job, and so it's so strange.
Legitimately, at the beginning of your story, I thought you were going to say, like, how long are they going to live, or when are they going to die, and just leave me the heck alone.
No.
Please die soon.
Just get out of
Hurry
my
up
life.
and die already.
No, but it's just like a moment where like, do you guys have that? Like a moment where you're just like, you're in your boxes and all of a sudden something jolts you out of it and you're like, oh my gosh.
Usually it's getting screamed at through a drive-through window by Terry Bangeter.
No, that puts me in a box.
So I worked service for about a year so far. And so I have lots of customer service stories. And it's one of those things where I think, it'd be nice if I was like dictator of America, I would make everyone work customer service for like at least a year. Maybe like 3 months, but like enough times that within a generation, we would no longer have an issue with being mean to wait staff. Because once you work customer service, you're like, oh my goodness gracious, this job is so hard and people are so mean and they are so quick to, any little mistake. I remember this one guy, he didn't get enough pepperoni on his pizza and he was like swearing and screaming at us. And so there are like multiple managers trying to de-escalate the situation. Multiple employees at this point who have tried to help him are now like crying. Like he was a jerk. And he leaves and my boss, we're talking and he's like, yeah, you gotta get the pepperonis, right? And I was like, dude, no, I don't want to ever give that. I want to short that man pepperonis for the rest of his life.
I want to take the pepperonis off his pizza.
But leave the little circle so he knows that they used to be there.
Yes, exactly.
I'm gonna lick every
little
pepperoni
patch of sauce
before I put it on and
missing the
spill
cheese.
Pizza. But then he comes over and he's talking about how his wife just recently died of colon cancer. And
dang it.
yeah, you're like,
now you feel like a jerk.
Yeah, you're like, I'm the bad person. But then, later I Facebook stalked him and found out that was not the case. And so I felt better about being there after. But it's this idea of like, he could have, right? He could have, just gotten back from the hospital. He just found out he has terminal cancer and he just wants a flippin' pepperoni pizza and he wants it to have the correct number of pepperonis because he's going to die. And that's a small thing for me to do, to just, make sure that there's the correct number of pepperonis on his pizza. But it could make his day, to just not have to worry about. And it's that idea of like, one, don't be a jerk to waitstaff, but also as waitstaff, to take someone like that and to put them through the maybe you are dying filter of belief and action. And you're like, how would I treat this if this was a 6-year-old with terminal cancer? And you're like, okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd act differently.
No, but you know what I think is super interesting about that story that you just told is, he was being awful to you. And then, you hear the story about his wife, like, oh, but then Facebook stalked him and then you justified your bad feelings to him again.
Yeah.
So like, that's what we need to not do, because I am like a firm believer of if you have to justify your actions, are your actions correct? And so like the whole point is, to like not have to seek justification. There's a difference between validating and justifying something, and I think that's what's super important to like make clear is you can support and you can, deal with somebody and understand their emotions and empathize with them, but you do not have to justify if there are bad feelings, or, you don't have to give them, like that's a right thing to feel. It's oh, you're feeling that. I'm sorry, like this, I understand, instead of that's the right thing to do and this is what you should do about it.
There's this speaker guy, and he's like a Tony Robbins type, but I can't remember his name. And I'm going to censor it for Paradigm, but he's like, if it's not a heck yeah, it's a no. And he uses that to like govern his decisions. And I think we can go to that for like our emotional decisions as well. If you can't just right on the face of it be like, yep, this is 100% correct, you probably shouldn't be doing it, as far as like to agree with your justification point. And I feel like that ties into
it's not always as simple as that.
I think it is.
Not everything is black and white. Not every decision is a right or a wrong. Sometimes it's this will take me in one direction and this will take me in another.
I just meant that you would cut out the gray to be like, this most likely is good, but it could be bad. Therefore, I'm going to just not do it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that Anatomy of Peace talks about this idea of the justification, right? And it's to what Ava is saying, if you have to justify your actions, then the actions are probably not correct. And I think that's what you're getting at, is that if you aren't sure that they're correct, then they're probably not. So it's just sort of two sides of the same coin here. It's taking it from the opposite end of the decision-making process. But I think it's just correct. I mean, there are decisions like moving to America or moving, or, doing your homework, or...
Those are equivalent.
That's what I mean. Like, they're so not equivalent.
Some projects feel like that.
Huge opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Of like uprooting your life versus doing your homework. One of them affecting many, many people. One of them affecting really just yourself, right? And at the end of the day, every decision that we make has to be in line with the most amount of good for the least amount of bad. You know what I mean? At the end of the day.
Is this correct? Along with, the movement being about, seeing people as people and also seeing yourself as a person, it's almost about practicing mindfulness.
Yeah. Being really aware of what you're doing and what your choices are and how you affect people.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to be very careful with what Debono was saying, because it moves very quickly into like radical utilitarianism with emotions, which does not always turn out the best.
Right.
But I mean, yeah, you want to, it's golden rule type-esque. I think it was Mr. Ellsworth that told me that, this could be wrong, but he had the rule of the grandmother rule instead of the golden rule. It was do unto others as you would have them do unto your 90-year-old grandmother. It's not Mr. Ellsworth.
Does that mean I have to like hold everyone's hand as they cross the street and like
no, but like
help them up the stairs?
Mr. Rossman was talking about it in a customer service standpoint, right?
Okay.
Like, am I going to make a deal that I would want someone else to make with my 90-year-old grandmother?
Right. Okay. I was like, I do not want to fix every single person's iMac
For
and
free.
like teach them how to use it. That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
No, but just that you're like just fully assuming that they're ignorant to whatever business dealing is going on, and you
Right.
could pull anything, any scam you wanted to pull, you could do it. But it's your grandma, so you want to be 100% upfront.
But like, what if you're the grandma in the case? Like, that sounds weird. But
What if I'm grandma?
what if I'm grandma? Like, do either of you have an experience where like maybe you were in the wrong and somebody decided to treat you like a person instead of like an object? And
My mom, every day for the last 17 years of my life, I am always in the wrong, and she is usually in the right, and I am sucky at times, to say the least.
Yeah, actually, and Ava, I know you're probably familiar with this story, but my first sort of 6 months at Paradigm, I was still figuring things out. I was going from this very regimented way of teaching where I'm like, where's the assignment? Why isn't it turned in? Are you doing the right thing or whatever? And trying to figure out how to like honor the person. And in my seminar class, which for those of you who don't know is a 3-hour block where we do history and language arts because we love it, and also
Because
for
we're
masochistic
masochists.
reasons.
Yes.
but it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot, right?
Especially for like 14 through 17-year-olds. It can be much.
It's a lot for 30-year-olds.
Oh, for sure. To have to deal with like 30 students, just like, I don't want to read Les Mis. Les Mis is long and boring. I would die.
But that's where the passion comes in, right? But anyway, so I'm in this class, and I know something's not working, and I can't figure it out because I'm usually very good at motivating and connecting with my students. And a student or a couple of students pulled me out of the room. This was Megan and Shelby, right?
Megan and
and
Shelby.
Some of you may know them and some of you may not, but they have since graduated and
They passed on.
they've moved on from
They've
Paradigm.
gone to the other side.
Anyway, so they pulled me aside, and Megan very candidly, and to her credit with a lot of bravery, to speak to someone who is an adult in a respectful way, but in a challenging way, said to me, "You're struggling, right?" And I kind of looked at her, and I definitely saw a chair and not a human. And she said, there's this great reading that you can do that will really help you get into the mood of Paradigm. I know you want to be a Paradigm mentor. Here's a reading. And she gave me a reading from TJ Ed.
No way.
Yes, I got homework from a 16-year-old in my first 6 months of Paradigm. And my immediate response was, well, maybe you don't really know what you're talking about. I've been teaching for a while. I didn't say this to her, but that was my initial response, right? And the hard thing was when I walked away from this conversation and I remembered it, I couldn't see malice or pride or disrespect in her eyes. What I could see was actual appreciation and caring for what I was trying to do. And so I was kind of forced to be like, maybe I should do the reading. And I did. And it was a catalyst for a huge and profound change in my teaching style, my teaching practice. And so, yeah, I've definitely had experiences where it's happened. And the most profound one I can tell you about was when a relatively young person treated me like a human being, despite the fact that I was treating her like an object, and caused me to shift and change my paradigm. That's why I believe in the Camp Moriah movement, because I've seen it work on me.
That's
That
awesome.
is so powerful. I kind of can't imagine that happening as far as like for me having the guts to call someone out like that and having it be respectful and go the way you